Today, we're going through every single game on the Big 12 schedule, all 16 teams, and we're picking a winner for every game.
Can you believe it? It's football. I've been watching it for 40 years.
Are you kidding me?
You're listening to Winning Cures Everything.
Game day, baby. Wake up or get out.
Here's your host,
A confident young man, a superb athlete.
Gary Seegers.
Welcome in. Winning Cures Everything. It's a college football podcast. I'm your host, Gary Seegers, at Gary WCE on all the different socials. Most active on X. You guys should know this by now. If you haven't already, subscribe, hit the like button. I know they tell you not to say that at the beginning of the show, but we're going to do our way. That's the way it works. So 16 teams in the Big 12, and as we've done with the SEC and the Big 10 and the ACC, we're going to go through every single game. Now, if we spend 2 minutes on every single team, 16 teams, that's at least 32 minutes that this podcast will be. We did a more in-depth preview of the conference, but right now we're just picking winners and losers. I'll give you some reasoning behind it. We'll talk about schedule spots, etc. But let's go on and get to this thing, and that way you can see exactly what we're doing. All right, we'll start off with this. Arizona starts off with Hawaii in week 1. Hawaii starts off in week 0 against Stanford, and then they got to go to Arizona. I've got Zona favored by 12. I'm going to give them that win. Win over Weber State, start off 2-0. And then on a Friday night non-conference game, they host Kansas State. Yes, I know they're in the same conference, but this is still a non-conference agreement. So they play 10 Big 12 teams this season. I've got a loss there because I've got Kansas State favored by more than 11 points, 11.5 points. There's a bye in week 4. Then they play at Iowa State. I don't think they get that one either. So 2-2 through week 5. I've got a win at home over Oklahoma State. So 3-2 through week 6. And then the schedule gets ridiculous. I've got a loss at home to BYU, so 3-3. Then I've got a loss at Houston. I've actually got Houston favored by 3.25 in that ball game. And these ratings, by the way, were my initial ratings. I have new ones. You can go over to bettingcfb.com, sign up over there, and I have put out an updated spread, projected spread, on every single game on the FBS calendar, every FBS versus FBS game. So, week 9, we got a bye week, and then they play at Colorado, they host Kansas, they play at Cincinnati, they host Baylor, and they play at Arizona State. I don't have them favored in any of those. Now, maybe they sneak up and surprise somebody. I don't really like the roster that they've got right now. I do like Noah Fafita, but you kind of saw what he was like without protection last year. I don't really trust this offensive line. I've got Arizona 3-9. Their over-under win total is 5.5. To go over 5.5 is minus 108. So I am going way under on this. To go under is minus 112. Their odds to win the conference are 35-1. Where the 5.5 comes from, I guess it's just like everybody in this conference, it's a crapshoot. Like maybe they sneak a win against Kansas or against Houston on the road or something like that, but I don't see it. Like they got Arizona State, Baylor, Iowa State, Kansas State. That's all really difficult stuff. And then winnable games at Houston, at Colorado, at Cincinnati. I'm not seeing it. Arizona State, win over Northern Arizona. I've got a win at Mississippi State, although I've got them favored by less than 10 points there. Win over Texas State. I've got them favored by 3 touchdowns on that one. I know they were lucky to win that game last year. This looks like a different Texas State team. So we're starting off 3-0. Then they play at Baylor in week 4. Baylor has Samford the week before, and this one is at home for Baylor. So I'm going to give Baylor that win. So 3-1. I've got Arizona State beating TCU at home. So 4-1 through week 5. Then you got a bye week in week 6. Week 7 at Utah, I've got a loss. So Arizona State starting off with a 4-2 record. And then they host Texas Tech. I've got a win over Texas Tech. I've got a win over Houston. I've got a loss at Iowa State. That would be their 4th straight game in week 10, right before a bye week. And then the end of the schedule, I think that these are easier wins. So at this point, they're 6-3, but then I've got a win over West Virginia, I've got a win over Colorado, and I've got a win over Arizona. The game is at Colorado in the middle of that. I think this is a really good team. Arizona State, their over-under is 8.5. To go over is -106. I will take Arizona State at 9-3, so give me the over on that. Arizona State to win the conference title is plus 55 or plus 550, so 55-1, which is the exact same as 4 other teams in the conference. Nobody knows what to do with this conference. I mean, it's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. All right, moving along. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. We can get that back on the screen. BYU, their win total sits at, I don't know why I have them in this order. Baylor should be next, but regardless, BYU, their over/under is 6.5. Jake Retzlaff, no longer on the team. He is now at Tulane. We're going to have to trust that their quarterback room knows what they're doing. Do we trust them? I mean, we'll see. We will certainly see. To win the conference, BYU is sitting at 25-1. 25-1. So let's go through it. Portland State win. Stanford win. Bye week in week 3. Week 4 at East Carolina. I've got that as a win. Then they go to Colorado. At Colorado, I will give them a loss. So 3-1. Then they get West Virginia at home. They get at Arizona at home. At Arizona at home. What am I talking about? They play at Arizona. So I'm looking at 5-1 through week 7 of the season. And on the back end, it gets difficult. This is where your bread gets buttered. Utah at home, I've got a loss. At Iowa State, I've got a loss. You got a bye week in week 10, week 11 at Texas Tech. I have that as a loss as well. I do have a win over TCU in week 12. Then at Cincinnati, I have a loss. And UCF at home, I have a win. I've got BYU 7-5, so I've got them going over the 6.5. Do I feel good about it? No, not in the slightest. But going over 6.5 is -122, so we'll take that right there. We will take that. Baylor, their over-under is 7.5. So their win total sits at 7.5. To go over is -105. To go under, -115. To win the conference, Baylor is plus 650. So they are 5th on the list to win the conference. And, I mean, nobody knows what to do here. Nobody knows. It's just bananas. I've got a win over Auburn in week 1. So that one is going to be on a Friday evening, I believe. I don't have it on my schedule for whatever reason. And I know I've got Auburn favored, but I will take Baylor to win that game. Then the next week, I've got a loss at SMU. Win over Samford. Win over Arizona State in week 4. I mean, the beginning of this schedule is absolutely brutal for Baylor. Absolutely brutal. You play at Oklahoma State in week 5, and then you host Kansas State in week 6. Like I said, brutal first 6 weeks of the season. Week 7, you get your bye, and then at TCU. Again, very difficult. At Cincinnati in week 9, very difficult. UCF comes in week 10. Then you got a bye week in week 11. So I have got, 6-3 through the first 10 weeks of the season for Baylor. Week 12, coming off a bye, I have a win over Utah. I've got a win at Arizona in week 13. And then I've got a win over Houston in week 14. The end of the schedule is a lot easier, even with the game against Utah in week 12. So I've got Baylor at 9-3. And their win total, what do we say, 7.5? I like Baylor a lot. I like their quarterback, Sauger Robertson. I am a big fan of what they decided to do with this offense. They looked good last year. And I know that some of the wins were a little fluky, but some of the losses were too. I think that just is the Big 12 this year. So that's the way that I'm doing that one. Cincinnati is team number 5 here. And Cincinnati is 6.5 for their win total. To go over is plus 128. To go under is under 6.5 is minus 158. For them to win the conference, they are 30-1. 30-1. That's a big drop from what we've been talking about with Baylor and Arizona State, et cetera, right? So let's discuss Cincinnati, starting off with Nebraska. About 90% of that field at Arrowhead is going to be Nebraska fans. About 90%, 95% maybe. So give me Nebraska to win that one. Bowling Green in week 2, I've got Cincinnati winning that. Northwestern State, I've got Cincinnati winning that one. And then you got a bye week in week 4. At Kansas, I gave them a loss. I've got Kansas favored by almost a touchdown there. Iowa State comes in week 6. I gave Cincy the win, even though I've got Iowa State favored by 4 points. UCF comes in the week after that in week 7. Yeah, there we go. So I am looking at 4-2 through week 7 of the season. And then we start to get a little crazy. At Oklahoma State, I've got a loss. Baylor, I've got a loss. At Utah, I've got a loss. I have them favored against Oklahoma State, but only by half a point. I think Oklahoma State's going to surprise some people this year. So, through that point, we're looking at 4-5. Then you got a bye week in week 11. Week 12, Arizona. I've got a win there. BYU comes in week 13. I've got a win there. Last game at Nippert. I feel pretty good about that. And then at TCU, I've got TCU favored by 10 points. I will take TCU to win that game. So that puts Cincinnati at 6-6. That means I'm going with the under 6.5 wins, which is minus 158 on that. Team number 6. Let's go on and move this up a little bit. Colorado. Colorado's win total is 5.5. To go over is minus 118. To go under is minus 104. Do I like the roster as much as last year? No. Do I like the coordinators that Coach Prime has? Yes. I think the quarterback room could be pretty decent. I think it could be all right. I think their lines of scrimmage could be all right. Defense coordinator Robert Livingston, I believe is his name. He's fantastic, and it would not surprise me to see him go back to the NFL next year if they have a pretty decent showing this season. So let's go through all of the games on the Colorado schedule. I've got a loss to Georgia Tech on a Friday night in week 1. I've got a win over Delaware in week 2, win at Houston in week 3, win over Wyoming in week 4. That's 3-1. I've got a win over BYU at home in Folsom Field in week 5. Week 6 is when it starts to become an issue because they've already played 6 straight games at that point. At TCU, I've got a loss, so we're looking at 4-2. And then Iowa State comes in. I'll give them a win over Iowa State in their 7th straight game. Iowa State has to play Arizona, at Cincy, and at Colorado all in a row. I will take Colorado to beat Iowa State. So you're looking at 5-2 through week 7 of the season. Bye week in week 8. At Utah, I've got a loss. Arizona comes in, I've got a win. And then, the end of the schedule is brutal. Brutal. At West Virginia, I've got a loss there. I've got Colorado favored by 1 point, but I think West Virginia gets the win there. Based on, let's see. All right, so they will have played at Houston the week before that, and they play at Arizona State. West Virginia does the week after. I think at home they get the win there. All right, Colorado, let's see. Bye week in week 12. And then week 13, I've got a loss to Arizona State. I've got a loss at Kansas State. So that puts them at 6-6. That means I would go over the 5.5. Colorado's chances to win the conference title, let's see, plus 3,000, so 30-1. Okay, I can get with it. Let me go ahead and tell you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, subscribe to the podcast as well, because we are doing a lot of audio-only podcasts this year. There will be a lot of those. So make sure that you are tuned in to the podcast, and we will have those things rocking and rolling. Check out bettingcfb.com. I'm going to be putting up a lot of stats, my favorite plays, all that kind of stuff. A lot of you have been hitting me up on X, at GaryWCE. No, I'm not doing the BetUS show this year. I burned out rapidly. And just a personal journey, I have lost over 30 pounds since I left that in February, and I'm feeling good. I needed some personal stuff taken care of. We'll say that. We'll say that. So make sure you are subscribed everywhere you can subscribe. Check out bettingcfb.com. I would certainly appreciate that. Tickets to everything are expensive these days, and I know you're like me. You want to catch a big game or a concert, maybe even tickets to a show. Why not save some money every time you buy tickets? Visit Ticketsmarter.com or use the TicketSmarter mobile app and use the promo code WCE10, that's WCE10, to save $10 on any order of $100 or more, or use WCE20, that's WCE20, to save $20 on an order of $300 or more. It's not a one-time sign-up bonus or anything. Seriously, every time you buy tickets, you can save money on already great deals. So do yourself a favor. Think smarter with TicketSmarter. All right, we move on to the Houston Cougars, and Houston, let's see, 33-1 to win the conference, and their win total sits at 5.5. To go over is -194. To go under is +154. So almost 2-1 for them to hit 6 wins this season. And if you've been watching this podcast a long time, you know how I feel about Willie Fritz. We'll say that. You know how I feel about Willie Fritz. So going through the schedule, Stephen F. Austin, I've got to win. At Rice, I've got to win. And then at home on a Friday night, I've got a loss to Colorado. Bye week in week 4, I've got a win at Oregon State, even though I've only got Houston favored by about 2 points there. But 3-1 through week 5 of the season. Loss at home to Texas Tech. I've got Texas Tech favored by almost 8 points. I've got a loss at Oklahoma State. I've got Oklahoma State favored by about 1.5 there. Week 8, I've got a win over Arizona at home, a loss at Arizona State, and then they get West Virginia at home in week 10. I've got a win there, and I've got a win over UCF on the road in week 11. At that point, you're sitting at 6-4. I think that UCF game is how you get to a bowl game, because you've got a bye in week 12, but then you host TCU and you play at Baylor. I've got a more than a touchdown underdog in both of those, and at Baylor, I've got them a double-digit underdog. So 6-6 looks pretty good. -194, $194 to 100. It's not one of my favorite plays, but I do expect Houston to take a leap this season. Iowa State. Iowa State's win total is 7.5. To go over is +114. To go under is -140. We're going to see exactly what Rocco Becht does with a new receiving core, because, man, they had some monsters on that thing last year. But looking at their schedule, they play in Ireland in week 0 against Kansas State. And then we know what their record is with FCS teams. Don't pay attention to that number. It is wrong. But yeah, they host South Dakota the very next week in week 1. They host Iowa in week 2. I've got a win over Iowa, because almost everybody is chalking that up as a loss. And then I've got a win over Arkansas State on the road. Now, why they're traveling to Jonesboro, I have no idea. Doesn't make any sense to me. But regardless, week 4 is a bye, and then week 5, they host Arizona. So 4-1 through week 5 of the season, I think it's pretty good. And that's when things go a little bit awry. At Cincinnati, I've got them favored there, but I've got a loss there. At Colorado, I've got them favored by 2.5 points, but I've got a loss there. Week 8, you got a bye week again. You're looking at 4-3 at this point. Week 9, BYU comes in. I've got Iowa State favored by a little less than a point. Week 10, I've got Arizona State coming in, and I've got Iowa State beating Arizona State. So a win over BYU. So lose at Cincy, lose at Colorado, beat BYU at home, beat Arizona State at home, and then in week 11, loss at TCU. Yeah, interesting. Week 12 is a bye week. Remember, they get 3 bye weeks because they play in week 0. Week 13, I've got them hosting Kansas. I've got them beating Kansas. And then they play at Oklahoma State. I've got them favored by more than a touchdown at the end of the season, though. Give me Mike Gundy in that spot. I will take Oklahoma State at home in what could be a win for a bowl game kind of matchup for Oklahoma State. So I've got Iowa State going under the 7.5 at minus 140 for them to win the conference. Iowa State is 13-1 plus 1,300. I think people have caught on that the roster is not exactly up to snuff, but we do know that Matt Campbell is an incredible football coach. So it is what it is. All right. Let's go through, and here we go. Kansas. Kansas is next up to win the conference. Kansas is 14-1, and their win total sits at 6.5. To go over is minus 162. A lot of love for Jalen Daniels in this spot, or Jalen Daniel, or Jay. You know, I feel like I should know this. No, not I feel. I should know this. Regardless, the quarterback is back. He didn't play well last year, coming off an injury. He did play all 14 games. It's not like he couldn't. I mean, we'll see what happens. I think that they lost a lot when they lost Andy Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinator, before last season. Jeff Grimes came in as the offensive coordinator, was not good, and ended up moving to Wisconsin. Is what it is. Let's go through it. Fresno State in week 0, I've got to win. I've got Kansas favored by more than 14 points there. Wagner in week 0 is Fresno State. Week 1 is Wagner. I've got to win there as well. At Missouri, I've got Missouri favored by 7.5. I think Missouri wins that one. So 2-1 through the first 2 weeks of the season. Week 3 is a bye. Week 4, they host West Virginia. I think they get that one. Week 5, they host Cincinnati. I think they get that one. And then the schedule toughens up because you start going on the road. You start dealing with some interesting spots, we'll say. So you're sitting at 4-1. At UCF, I've got a loss. At Texas Tech, I've got a loss. Because I think they lose UCF, prepping for Texas Tech, because you've already got 2 conference wins. I think they'll be ready. I think they think that Texas Tech is going to be a big spot. At UCF, it's kind of a sandwich game. So, a loss at UCF, loss at Texas Tech. You're sitting at 4-3 through week 7 of the season. Week 8 is a bye. Week 9, I've got a loss at home to Kansas State. Week 10, I've got a win over Oklahoma State. Week 11, I've got a win at home, I've got a win on the road at Arizona, where I've got Kansas favored by 4.6 points. Week 12 is another bye. Week 13, at Iowa State, I've got a loss. And then week 14, Utah comes to town, and I think I've got Kansas favored by 0.5 point, but I think Utah is better than the numbers that even I have projected for them. So I've got Kansas at 6-6. So I've got them going under, which is plus 130. I might make that bet. We're going to see. We are going to see. All right. Let's see. We did Houston. We did Iowa State. We did Kansas. Let's do 2 more, and then we'll take another ad break right quick, and it won't be long, but you guys get the point. Kansas State. Kansas State's win total is 8.5. To go over is minus 106. To go under is minus 114. And I will go ahead and tell you I might be a little bit biased because I like Chris Kleiman. I do. I thought Avery Johnson was going to be awesome last year. I don't know if they used him exactly correctly. But Matt Wells is the offense coordinator there. He's going to be a lot of fun. Kansas State, to win the conference, is tied in first with 3 other teams. Plus 550. To win the conference. So let's go through it. I've got a win at Iowa State or against Iowa State in Aviva Stadium in Ireland. So starting off 1-0. Win over North Dakota in week 1. I've got a win over Army in week 2. I've got a win at Arizona in week 3. That would be 4-0 to start the season. Then they got a bye week in week 4. In week 5, a win over UCF at home. Week 6, they're riding the momentum train. I've got a win at Baylor there. And then at home the next week, coming off a Baylor game, I've got them losing to TCU. So TCU losing to them at home, that puts them at 5-1. You got a bye week in week 8 before they play at Kansas, and I will give them the win at Kansas. I think their roster is significantly better than the Jayhawks. Texas Tech comes in after Kansas. I think Kansas State beats Texas Tech. At Oklahoma State in week 12, coming off of a bye, I think they win that game. So right now you're looking at 9-1. At Utah, I think Utah wins that game. I've got Kansas State favored by 2.5 points, but I think Rice Eccles is a different beast. I think this will be a Saturday night game. Yeah, give me Utah to win that one. And then Colorado comes in at the very end of the season. Kansas State, I've got them favored by almost 12 points. I will take them to win that. Kansas State looking at 10-2, only 2 losses in the conference. So, yes, I will go over the 8.5, which would be minus 106. Over 8.5. I like them for 10 wins. Maybe I shouldn't, because it seems like I've got them at 10 wins every freaking year, and they never pull it off. They always lose to somebody they shouldn't. But this year, I think, will be different. I think a veteran, Avery Johnson, is going to be good. There you go. Oklahoma State, 5.5 is their win total. To go over is plus 140. To go under is minus 172. So much more likely that they will hit 5 wins as opposed to 6. But I am a Mike Gundy believer. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. The roster looks completely different. Gundy did go on to On 3 with Andy and Ari and said that this is the first season that they have actually purchased a roster. They didn't believe in the whole transfer portal, NIL, whatever thing beforehand. But now they realize, well, that's about the only way that you're going to be able to do business. So if you're going to do business, if you're going to win, you got to do it that way. So, Tennessee Martin in week 1, I've got to win. At Oregon in week 2, I've got Oregon favored by 26 points there. I think Oregon wins that game. It just roster difference is significant in that game. Week 3 is a bye. Week 4, Tulsa at home. I've got to win there. Week 5, Baylor comes to town. I've got Baylor favored by almost 8 points, but I will give Oklahoma State the surprise win in that one. Oklahoma State seems like the kind of team that will shock people, certainly early. I'll say that. Certainly early in that spot. So I've got to win over Baylor. At Arizona, I think that's a loss because you get a big win, emotional high, and then you got a letdown spot at Arizona. Arizona's going to need a win at that point, or they'll be feeling themselves and feeling good. And, yeah, I will give Arizona the win there. I've got Arizona favored in that game. Houston comes to town, and I will give Oklahoma State the win there. In week 7, I've got the Cowboys favored by 1.5 points at home. Yeah, I'll take Oklahoma State. Cincinnati comes in to Boone Pickens Stadium in week 8. I will give Oklahoma State the win there. So right there, you're looking at 5-2, and everybody's going to be talking about them going to Texas Tech in week 9. I've got Texas Tech favored by almost 14 points here. Yeah, that's going to be a loss. I'm going to give them a loss there. At Kansas in week 10, coming off an emotional game, I've got a loss there. I've got Kansas favored by almost 10 points. I'll give Kansas the win on that one. Week 11 is another bye. Week 12, you got Kansas State at home, but I already told you how much I like Kansas State. At UCF, I've got UCF favored by 5.72 points in this spot. I'll give UCF the win there. UCF, if you look at their schedule, they'll be coming off of what I've got is 3 straight losses, and then they got to go to BYU. It'll be the last home game of the season. I've got it listed as FBC Mortgage Stadium, but it's something bounce house now. So, or something bounce stadium or whatever it might be. But Scott Frost, I think he sneaks that one in there. And then in week 14, in order to make a bowl game, they play Iowa State at home. I've got Iowa State favored by 7.5. I will give Oklahoma State the win there. So 6-6, the over there for me. And I've got it at plus 140. Yeah, that's plus 140. I don't think they're going to win the conference, but I think they get to a bowl game again. And I like the plus 140. That makes a whole lot of sense to me.
We're proudly supported by Go Sleeves, the best kinesiology technology on the market. Go Sleeves' patented compression sleeves, socks, and more increase blood flow and lymphatic flow to help your body recover, manage pain, and maintain peak performance. Right now, you can save 15% by going to gosleeves.com/WCE or by using the promo code WCE on their site. Go Sleeves. It's go time.
And again, if you haven't already, like the video for me, jump in the comments. I want to hear from you. I want you to tell me what I got right, what I got wrong, what you think is going to happen in the Big 12 this season. I would certainly appreciate that. And jump on the podcast app, whatever your favorite app is, the iHeartRadio app, the Apple podcast app, Spotify, etc. Leave a nice 5-star review. That would certainly help us out in the rankings. etc. I don't know where everybody gets their podcast now. Hit me up on Twitter or X or whatever you call it at Gary WCE, and tell me where you listen to podcasts. I would like that. I might be in the business for a new podcast app. We'll see. Don't forget about bettingcfb.com as well. All right, let's do our last 5 teams in the Big 12 for 2025. TCU, the Horned Frogs. I feel good about Josh Hoover. I feel good about really all of this. At North Carolina, I've got to win. I've got them favored by almost 5 points there. Week 2 is a bye. Week 3, Abilene Christian. Got to win there. Week 4, SMU comes to town. I know I have SMU beating Baylor, but I have TCU beating SMU at home this year. I know SMU I've got as favored right there by 0.22 points. I like TCU in that game. I think they're going to throw the ball all over SMU. So 3-0 through week 4 of the season. They play at Arizona State in week 5. I think that one is a loss. I've got Arizona State favored by a little less than 5 points in that one. Week 6, Colorado comes to town to Amon G. Carter Stadium. And I've got TCU favored by almost 9 points. I will give TCU the win there. So 4-1 through week 6. At Kansas State. I already told you, I love Kansas State, but I think TCU wins this game. Call it a hunch, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's the week before Baylor. I know everybody's going to be counting TCU out, but I really think they get this win. Week 8, they host Baylor. I think Baylor wins that game. See, I'm going a little contrarian, if you will. Something along those lines. So a loss to Baylor and then a win over West Virginia on the road at Milan Puskar Stadium. Milan Puskar. I love saying that. I love it. All right, so through that point, we're looking at 6-2 through week 9 of the season. You got a bye week in week 10, but then I've got a win at home over Iowa State, where I've got TCU favored by almost 4 points. I've got a loss at BYU in week 12. I've got a win at Houston in week 13, and I've got a win over Cincinnati at home in week 14, where I've got TCU favored by, there we go, 10.8 points. So TCU, I've got them 9-3. Their win total is 6.5. And to go over the 6.5, they are minus 180. This one I really like. I will take TCU to go over. For them to win the conference, plus 900, that would be 9-1. That is the 6th best odds or 6th shortest odds in the Big 12. So 9-3 for TCU. I like Sonny Dykes' team. I think they're going to do big things this season. Big things. Texas Tech. This is the one everybody's hyped about. This is the one that everybody wants to see what this $20 million transfer portal class can do, et cetera, right? They bought themselves a football team. That is totally legal now. I'm totally good with that. That's the way it goes. Will they live up to the hype? That's the question. So let's go through it. Texas Tech is tied for first to win the conference at plus 550. And their win total sits at 8.5. To go over is minus 150. Minus 150. Pay attention. Arkansas Pine Bluff in week 1. I think that's a win. Kent State in week 2. That is a win. Oregon State comes into Jones AT&T Stadium in week 3. I think that's a win. I've got them favored by 17.26 points there. Over Kent State, I've got them favored by 38. That one could be like 45 by game time. I mean, that one will be a monster. Week 4, they play at Utah, and that is where the bread gets buttered, my friends. This is where you're going to know whether or not you got a decent football team or not, because we know what Kyle Whittingham likes to do. Y'all know that I like Utah. I've got Texas Tech losing the game in Rice-Eccles Stadium in week 4, where I've got Utah favored by a little less than half a point. Week 5 is a bye week, so we're looking at 3-1 through week 5. At Houston, I've got a win there, where I've got Tech favored by almost 8 points. Kansas comes in week 7. I've got a win for Texas Tech there. I've got them favored by almost 7 points. At Arizona State in week 8, I have a loss. I've got Arizona State favored by almost 5 points in that. Oklahoma State comes to AT&T Stadium in week 9. I've got Texas Tech favored by almost 14 points. I've got a win there for them. So at that point, we're looking at 6-2 through week 9 of the season. Week 10, I have another loss at Kansas State, where I've got Kansas State favored by 5.38 points. Yeah, we will see. Do we trust Bear and Morton to stay healthy? I mean, I think that's a good question, right? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I've got a loss at Kansas State. I've got a win over BYU in Week 11. I've got a win over UCF in Week 12, bye week in Week 13, and a win at West Virginia in Week 14. I've got them favored by 7.5 points, roundabout. Yeah, I think they win that one. So 9-3 for Texas Tech. That means I've got them going over the 8.5 at -150, but 3 conference losses could certainly spell doom for the Red Raiders. Will they be happy with their purchase at that point? UCF. That is our next team up here. And I've got a win over Jacksonville State. I've got a win over North Carolina A&T. So 2 wins to start off the season. Week 3 is a bye week. Then UCF hosts North Carolina and Bill Belichick in Week 4. I think North Carolina wins that game. Then they play at Kansas State. Again, you guys know my love for Kansas State. UCF, I've got them losing that one. So 2-2 through Week 5. Kansas comes in the week after Kansas State, after the road game at Kansas State. I think they win against Kansas. At Cincinnati the next week in Nippert Stadium, I've got a loss there. I've got a loss in Week 8 in their 5th straight game. I've got a loss at home to West Virginia. West Virginia will be coming off of a bye week. I know Rich Rod will have something drawn up here. So you're looking at 4 losses there. So 3-4 through Week 8 of the season. Week 9 is a bye. And then that's where it gets really, really difficult for UCF. They play at Baylor in Week 10. I've got that as a loss. They host Houston in Week 11. I've got that as a loss, even though I do have them favored by 4.71 points. At Texas Tech, I've got them double-digit underdogs there, so I think they'll lose that. I have them favored over Oklahoma State in Week 13. I think they win that game. That's the last game at home at the Bounce House. So I will take UCF to win that one. And then a loss at BYU at Lavelle Edwards Stadium in Week 14 of the season. I think they lose that one. So UCF sitting at 4-8. Their win total is 5.5. To go over is even money, plus 100. To go under is minus 122. I will take the under. I'm not a big believer in what Scott Frost is trying to do in Week 1. Jackson, the quarterback, I haven't seen him do it yet. Maybe he will in Scott Frost's offense. But maybe I'm just completely misreading the situation here. I don't really like the roster. I don't know what to make of Scott Frost after what happened at Nebraska. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. UCF to win the conference is dead last, plus 8,000. That's pretty wild. Pretty wild. All right, 2 more teams. Let's roll through it here. Utah at UCLA in Week 1. I've got them favored by 2 points. I think they win at UCLA because I think that Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley and all those guys are going to have something for Nico. I'll say that. So win in Week 1. Win over Cal Poly in Week 2. Win at Wyoming in Week 3. Win over Texas Tech in a monster game in Week 4 where I've got them favored by a little less than half a point. And then a loss after the big Texas Tech game. I've got them going on the road to Milan Puskar Stadium. I really hope I'm saying that right. West Virginia fans, don't kill me. I'm trying. I feel like that's how you're supposed to say it. All these years covering this, I don't know how. I don't know how to say that at this point. But anyway, I've got a loss for Utah at West Virginia, where I've got Utah favored by 5.5 points, but emotional game against Texas Tech. That's a big-time spot, and then you got to go on the road to Morgantown across multiple time zones. I don't think that's a good schedule spot for Utah. So 4-1 through the first 5 weeks of the season. Bye week in Week 6. And that's when you get to calm down and get things rolling again and get something ready for Arizona State. I've got Arizona State favored by 2 there, but I will give Utah the win over Arizona State. At BYU, I think Utah wins at BYU. I don't think they're going to lose Kyle Whittingham's last game against BYU. Colorado comes into Rice Eccles in Week 9. I've got a win there. Week 10, Cincinnati comes in. I think they get a win there. Then you've got another bye week in Week 11, and they have to play at Baylor. I think they lose the game at Baylor, but I think they beat Kansas State in Week 13, even though I've got Kansas State favored. And then they win at Kansas in the last week of the season. So Utah, I'm a buyer. Jason Beck's offense, Devin Dampier, I like what he. I know that there's so much hype on this team, but I believe in this team. So give me Utah at 10-2. Utah is one of the favorites to win the conference at plus 550, and their win total sits at 7.5. To go over is minus 176. So I am way over that number. If you notice, there's not a 4.5, and there's not a 9.5. Every team in this conference is between 5.5 and 8.5 wins. Nobody knows what to do with this conference. It's a crapshoot every single week. Last team on the board is Rich Rodriguez's West Virginia Mountaineers. It feels weird to say, doesn't it? I mean, that's been a long time ago. But he's back. We're ready to rock and roll this thing. It's been 15 years at least. 16 maybe. It's been a long time. They brought in 70-plus new players. They're going to be running this incredible read scheme that Rodriguez does. And I think they've got the pieces to actually fit it. If you look at the roster, I think, and of course, their defense coordinator, they stole from Oklahoma. Now, part of that could be because when you're at Oklahoma, you're not really calling your defense. You're calling Brent Venables' defense. So maybe he wanted to go back. This is the same guy that was at Jacksonville State with Rich Rodriguez and had a Zach Alley is the name. He did fantastic things at Jack State. Oklahoma hires him. After a year, he's like, nope, I'm going with Rich Rod. Maybe that says something about who you'd rather work for. Maybe it's because Rich Rodriguez lets you do your own thing on defense, so you don't have to coordinate with Brent Venables or whatever. But the money's good, and there you go. So let's get into West Virginia right quick, very, very quickly. Robert Morris, I've got a win. At Ohio, why are we going to Ohio? I've got a win there anyway. Pitt comes in the next week. I've got a win over Pitt. I think Rich Rod is going to be super focused on that game. So 3-0 to start off with. At Kansas, I think that's a loss. It's a bad schedule spot. It's the week after Pitt comes in and the week before Utah comes in. I think they'll lose at Kansas. Utah comes in week 5. I think they beat Utah. I've already told you that's a bad schedule spot for Utah. Week after Texas Tech, week before a bye week. I think West Virginia wins that game. Then West Virginia has to go all the way out to LaVell Edwards Stadium in Provo, Utah, and that's on a Friday. I think they lose that game at BYU. So, week 7 is a bye week, and we're sitting at 4-2 already. But it's a pretty difficult schedule. So let's continue on. After a bye week, I think West Virginia wins at UCF. And yeah, West Virginia or UCF coming off of they'll be in their 5th straight game. West Virginia is coming off of a bye. I'll give West Virginia that one. So we're sitting at 5-2 through week 8. Week 9, TCU comes in. I think TCU wins. Then they go to Houston. I think they lose the game at Houston. Colorado comes in the next week. I think they beat Colorado. That gets them to 6 wins. They're feeling good about themselves. But they will have a 5th straight game at Arizona State. I think they lose that ball game. Then week 13, you got a bye, and Texas Tech comes in week 14. And it's a bye week the week before for Texas Tech and for West Virginia. So I will have West Virginia at 6-6. Their win total, as I said, was 5.5. To go over is plus 120. I will go over on that. And for them to win the conference, West Virginia is plus 4,500, so 45-1. I don't think they're going to win the conference by any stretch of the imagination, but it is what it is. So let's recap. Let's recap right quick. Arizona, I've got them 3-9. Arizona State 9-3. BYU 7-5. Baylor 9-3. Cincinnati 6-6. Colorado 6-6. Houston 6-6. Iowa State 7-5. Kansas 6-6. Kansas State 10-2. Oklahoma State 6-6. TCU 9-3. Texas Tech 9-3. UCF 4-8. Utah 10-2, and West Virginia 6-6. That is a lot of bowl teams. I will say that. I have Kansas State and Utah playing for the Big 12 title this season. And Utah won, in my head, Utah won the game at home at Rice-Eccles. I think it'll be a different story. I think Kansas State goes home with the Big 12 championship this year. As we said, these are two of the favorites to win the conference title at plus 550, along with with Texas Tech and Arizona State. Odds to make the playoff? Let's see. Kansas State is plus 440 to make the playoff. And Utah to make the playoff is plus 470. Probably better to just bet the plus 550 to win the conference for Kansas State or Utah, whichever you think. Make sure and jump in the comments and let me know who you think ends up winning this conference, what games you think I'm absolutely crazy for picking which way. I want to know it all. So jump in the comments on YouTube. If you're on the podcast app, leave a nice review. I would certainly love to hear from you as well. If you want to go the old school route, you can always email me, Gary@winningcureseverything.com. With that said, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Don't forget about bettingcfb.com. That's where my numbers are going to be up all season long. And you can follow me on X @GaryWCE. I'm going to be posting a lot of stats over there as well. With that said, let's get out of here. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. God bless college football, and hopefully all of your tickets cash this week.
Thanks for listening to Winning Cures Everything. Make sure and follow me on Twitter @GaryWCE. If you want to toss in a question, you can email me, Gary@winningcureseverything.com. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.